Hello and welcome to Indus News, live from Islamabad. I am Munib Ahmed with the news of this hour. Let's begin with the top stories first. The United Nations and the United States, among others, have called on the military to release Mali's transitional leadership. In a joint statement, they strongly condemned the attempted coup that took place following a cabinet reshuffle. Soldiers detained the President, Prime Minister and Defence Minister of the interim government on Monday. Israeli forces have killed another Palestinian and arrested 19 more in the occupied West Bank. Medics say the civilian died of gunshot wounds during a raid in Ramallah despite a ceasefire agreed last week. European Union leaders have agreed on a set of sanctions against Belarus, including a ban on the use of the bloc's airspace. In a statement, diplomats called on the International Civil Aviation Organization to urgently probe the incident. Brussels also demanded the immediate release of a dissident journalist detained by Minsk after diverting a passenger plane. Daily COVID-19 infections in India have dipped under 200,000 for the first time in 40 days. The country also reported more than 3,500 deaths in the past 24 hours. Here in Pakistan, the virus has claimed 92 more lives and infected over 2,200 people overnight. Nationwide, the tally has risen to 20,400, while globally there are 3.46 million fatalities and more than 167 million cases. And in the National Basketball Association, the Milwaukee Bucks beat Miami Heat 132-98 in Game 2 of the Eastern Conference first-round series. The win gives Milwaukee a 2-0 lead in their best-of-7 series. Giannis Antetokounmpo led the charge for the Bucks, finishing with 31 points, 13 rebounds and 6 assists. And these were the top stories. News in detail after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now let's have the news in detail. The United Nations and the United States, among others, have called on the military to release Mali's transitional leadership. Soldiers detained the President, Prime Minister and Defence Minister of the interim government on Monday. The development came after a cabinet reshuffle in which two members of a junta that seized power in August were replaced. The UN, African Union, European Union and several others issued a joint statement. They said a delegation of the Economic Community of the West African states will visit Bamako to help resolve the attempted coup. The group said it rejects in advance any acts imposed by coercion, including forced resignations. In a tweet, the UN mission to Mali called for an immediate and unconditional release of the detained leaders. Now, Israeli forces have killed another Palestinian and arrested 19 more in the occupied West Bank. Earlier, Israeli forces killed another teen near the French Hill colonial settlement in Jerusalem. Officials identified today's victim as Ahmad Jamil Fad. Medics said the civilian died of gunshot wounds during a raid in Ramallah despite a ceasefire agreed last week. Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken met Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Jerusalem. Blinken has begun a Middle East visit aimed at bolstering the truce and help speed humanitarian aid to the Palestinian enclave. Earlier, a State Department official suggested it is too early for wider peace talks between Israel and Palestine. European Union leaders have agreed on a set of sanctions against Belarus, including a ban on the use of the bloc's airspace. In a statement, diplomats called on the International Civil Aviation Organization to urgently probe the incident. Brussels also demanded the immediate release of a dissident journalist detained by Minsk after diverting a passenger plane. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said Minsk's move is a threat to civil aviation safety. She said European airlines should not fly over Belarus.
Belarus used its control over its airspace in order to perpetrate a state hijacking. Therefore, the safety and security of flights through Belarus airspace can no longer be trusted, and the Council will adopt measures to ban overflights of the EU airspace and deny access to airports, to EU airports, to Belarus airplanes.
Now, Latvia says it has expelled Belarusian diplomats in a tit-for-tat move. Latvia's foreign ministry says the diplomats can only return when the bilateral relationship gets back to normal. The ministry said Minsk asked Latvia's ambassador to leave Belarus within 24 hours, while other diplomats are given 48. In a statement, it said only one administrative staff member is allowed to remain at the Latvian embassy in Minsk. The rift started after Latvia replaced Belarus's national flag with an opposition flag at an ice hockey tournament. Riga's action was apparently aimed at expressing solidarity with Minsk arrested a dissenting journalist. Belarus said Latvia's move amounted to an act of international vandalism and called on Riga to apologize and return the state flag. Now, India's daily COVID-19 cases has dipped under 200,000 for the first time in 40 days. The country reported more than 3,500 deaths over the past 24 hours. Globally, there are over 3.46 million fatalities and more than 167 million cases. More about the pandemic in this report.
Although India has seen relief in the numbers of daily infections, many issues remain. Experts warn that 140 million migrant workers are at risk of being left out of the vaccination program, despite being at high risks of illness. Analysts say the fatality rate in major cities is much higher than the national average. In Delhi, the deaths rate topped 2.54% in the first 3 weeks of May, compared to the national average, which stood at 1.14%. In the second wave of coronavirus, India's rural areas have been the worst affected.
The state government has deployed the healthcare in charge of the village to primary healthcare center of slightly bigger towns. There are neither nurses nor doctors here for months. The rule is that they have to come at least twice a week to the center, but they don't even come twice a year.
The U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says about 39% of the American population is fully vaccinated against COVID-19. The situation in South America is not so promising. According to a survey, 1 in 5 Brazilian cities reported a shortage of vaccine doses last week. This too when the country's death toll is approaching 450,000. Over in Mexico, a large majority of the country is still waiting for the first dose of the COVID-19 vaccine. Hundreds of teachers, parents, and students protested against the government plans to reopen schools in such a scenario.
Accelerate the vaccination program before there is a return to physical classes. We believe that given the conditions we are going through, the program is very slow. At this time, not even 20% of the population is vaccinated. And given the terrible conditions of the schools we attend, it's very hard to return to the classes.
Malta has become the first EU country to vaccinate up to 70% of the adult population with at least one jab. Meanwhile, in Asia, Taiwan has recorded 6 new deaths from COVID-19 for the second day in a row. Malaysia reported 61 deaths, its highest daily toll since the pandemic began. Sri Lanka has extended its ongoing travel ban for another 2 weeks as health experts warn of a possible breakdown of the country's health system.
Meanwhile, in Pakistan, 92 people have lost their lives due to coronavirus in the past 24 hours. The Health Ministry says the death toll has risen to 20,400. They said the virus has infected over 2,200 people overnight. Officials say more than 905,000 people have been infected so far, of which 823,000 people have recovered. There are over 62,000 active cases in the country. More than 4,700 patients are critical. Meanwhile, Pakistan has developed a coronavirus vaccine with the help of Chinese experts. In a tweet, Special Assistant to the Prime Minister on Health said the vaccine named Pak-Vac passed rigorous testing. Moving on, Australia says it will close its embassy in Afghanistan on May 28th due to security fears. Prime Minister Scott Morrison said the move is in light of the international military withdrawal from Afghanistan. Morrison said the drawdown brings with it an increasingly uncertain security environment. He said the government has been advised that security arrangements could not be provided to support diplomatic presence. The Australian Prime Minister said the embassy will reopen in Afghanistan when circumstances permit. The security situation remains highly volatile as Afghan forces and the Taliban continue to fight amid foreign withdrawal. Now, China has slammed the United Kingdom for interfering in its internal matters under the guise of human rights. In a briefing, Xinjiang government officials condemned a UK Uyghur tribunal investigating claims of genocide. They said the tribunal is not a judicial body and has no legal basis for establishment. Officials added the so-called investigations and trials are merely being used to attack Xinjiang and smear China. Now, 7 people have died following a toxic gas leakage at a food processing factory in China's Sichuan province. Authorities say a bamboo shoot factory in the city of Yibin was undergoing equipment maintenance. They say all 7 victims first slipped into a coma and later died after medical treatment failed to revive them. Officials said another person who was hospitalized is in a stable condition. They added an investigation into the incident is underway. Now, moving to Peru, where at least 14 people, including 2 children, have been killed by the Shining Path rebel group in a remote hamlet. This comes ahead of the country's presidential election on June 6th. The military says pamphlets encouraging Peruvians not to vote were found at the site. In a statement, they termed the incident an act of genocide, saying the rebels labeled such attacks as a form of social cleansing. However, the statement assured Peruvians of a secure electoral process. The incident took place in a mountainous region where 75% of cocaine is produced in the South American country. Meanwhile, in Myanmar, anti-coup activists continue their calls for democracy despite violent crackdowns and arbitrary arrest. In Moniava, locals marched on the full moon day festival of Quezon in defiance of the military regime. A flash mob protest took place in Yangon, where the junta has imposed martial law. Witnesses say a bridge has been blown up in Hopin township of Kachin State, making the road inaccessible. Earlier, an American editor was detained in Yangon while boarding a flight to Malaysia. Danny Fenster's news organization says he has been transferred to Yangon's Ain Sen prison. An advocacy group says the military has killed 824 people since the coup. More news coming up in this news bulletin after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back now. Jeff Bezos has reclaimed his throne as the world's richest person after briefly losing his title to French fashion tycoon Bernard Arnault.
The 2 men entered the weekend on level terms. Both were worth $186 billion. Shares in Arnault's luxury goods conglomerate, LVMH, rallied in the second half of last week. LVMH stock performed even better on Monday, closing nearly 1% higher. That boosted Arnault's fortune by $1.7 billion, enough for him to briefly eclipse Bezos. However, Amazon's shares also ticked up more than 1% somewhere around midnight, making Bezos $2.4 billion richer than his short-term predecessor. As per business publisher Forbes, the Amazon CEO's net worth currently stands at $188.4 billion. Arnault has briefly ranked as the world's richest person several times in the past.
Well, now, Brazilians obsessed with the renowned New York City Police Department have refurbished their vehicles to impersonate their idols.
Pedestrians may need a moment to get their bearings as they witness an NYPD motorcade passing in Brazil's biggest city. Behind the swirling red lights and blaring sirens are a group of Brazilian fans obsessed with one of the world's most recognizable police forces. Inspired by the TV cop shows like Law and Order, it's their hobby to refurbish NYPD cars and wear their uniform.
It really gets people's attention. Many associate it with movies. Some don't understand what this car is doing here.
Impersonating a police officer is a crime in Brazil and many other countries. However, the group says they are getting away with it as they are not impersonating the Brazilian police.
Na verdade, há uma confusão.
Sometimes there is confusion with the vehicles. People think it is a real vehicle that is patrolling the streets of Sao Paulo or is helping the local police in a specific operation.
Brazil has a history of crimes involving police impersonation, including a 2019 heist. Investigators say robbers used the federal police livery to enter an airport and steal $40 million worth of gold and other metals.
In business stories now, the European Union says tensions with the United Kingdom stem from Brexit and not the Northern Ireland Protocol. In a briefing, EU Chief Ursula von der Leyen said there is no alternative to the full and correct implementation of the protocol. Leyen said implementation of the protocol is the only solution to ensure peace in Northern Ireland. She added the mechanism is critical for protecting the integrity of the bloc's single market. The protocol is designed to protect the peace process by avoiding a hard border for Ireland. It has angered unionists by effectively creating a barrier between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. This ties the region to a range of EU customs and regulatory rules. Now, the European stocks are making modest gains as easing inflation fears lift global market sentiment. Frankfurt's DAX is leading gains, adding close to 1%. The pan-European stock 600 has added nearly 0.5%. Italy's FTSE MIB and the CAC 40 in Paris have gained fractionally. London's FTSE is trading flat. Earlier Asian markets ascended following overnight gains on Wall Street. And now let's have a look at how the weather is doing around the world. That is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus News.